Chair, are we? Chair?
We're just signing
Clerk,
in, and then we'll go live in a second.
Thank you.
I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome everybody to the 18th meeting of the Corporate Service Committee, and which is our virtual meeting during COVID-19 emergency. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing and advisory committees, committee meetings, and information is available upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca, or you can call us at 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request for this specific meeting, please contact csc@london.ca. And I'll look for disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we do not have any consent items or scheduled items. We'll go to our items for direction. And the first one is a consideration of appointment for the Accessibility Advisory Committee of Alicia McGraw. And I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. We'll take comments or questions. Okay, seeing none, we'll call to question.
I'll vote yes, Chair.
Thank you.
I'll have to vote yes too. I'm still logging in. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Councillor Helmer?
I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
Thank you. Now we'll go to our request for delegation status for the advisory committees. And is it committee room number 5? Okay, we'll go to committee room number 5. I'll need a mover to open this portion of the meeting and a seconder, please. Anyone? Councillor Hopkins, seconded by, I'll second it. We'll actually do both of them at the same time. The request for delegation status for both for Shauna Lukowitz and Darcy Lacey. Are you okay with that, Councillor Hopkins? Comments or questions? No? We're voting now.
I'll vote yes, Chair.
Thank you.
I'll also vote yes.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
Now we'll go to committee room number 5. We'll start with Darcy Lacey. If you could just come up to the mic. Oops.
Good afternoon. Through the chair and all members of the committee, thank you for agreeing to hearing our delegation. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So thank you again. Pillar Nonprofit Network has its roots embedded in the core belief that volunteer engagement is key to a vibrant and engaged community. We respect and value the incredible gift of skills, knowledge, and experience that volunteers give to our community to make it better for all. To that end, along with the letter we had written expressing our concerns regarding the review of advisory committees, we want to raise today our deep concern and question why these committees have not met since March. We can assume that this is because of COVID, and it may have made some sense when we went initially into lockdown to suspend the committees. Perhaps you needed time to ensure that all members could have access to the technology resources that were needed to be able to participate fully. However, 8 months is too long. It's been many months since the city itself has moved back beyond lockdown, so there doesn't seem to be any reason why the committees have not been called back. It seems curious that this key resource that the city already has to access citizen voice and engagement is removed at a time when one would think their voices would have been the most beneficial. Individuals sitting on these committees were appointed for their skills and their expertise. The optics in terms of suspending their input at this time seems particularly incongruent to community engagement committees and disrespectful of the volunteers themselves. As we stand today, the city is making a lot of decisions around recovery efforts. City business itself is moving forward, yet advisory committees that are in place to provide input to these matters have not been called back. We feel that these committees are uniquely positioned to speak to and for the communities that have been marginalized. Communities that we all know have been disproportionately negatively impacted by the pandemic. Municipalities saying that they're working towards equity and inclusion is not good enough. This year has reminded us that racism and oppression exists even in our community. It existed before the pandemic, and it has definitely been exacerbated because of it. So this is a moment in history where you need to value all voices and demonstrate your commitment to this. I think this is a good time as well to reiterate the concerns made by Jacqueline Madden, the former chair of the Accessibility Advisory Committee. We feel that many of those concerns that she raised also apply to all advisory committees. We recognize and appreciate the many responsibilities of city staff and council during this time, but we don't think that citizen engagement is something we can frankly afford to ignore. At Pillar, we believe there needs to be willingness to lean on each other to help build an engaged and inclusive and vibrant community. In that spirit, we ask that the city reinstate the meetings of the advisory committee as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Darshi. We'll now hear from Mrs. Lukowitz.
Through the chair and to all members of the committee, thank you for agreeing to hear our delegation. One of the objectives of the Urban League of London is to promote and support citizen engagement in community and city decision-making. We believe residents are the building blocks of a successful, sustainable, vibrant, and equitable city. Their meaningful involvement leads to better decision-making and a city that works for all people. That is why, in addition to our already expressed concerns around the review of advisory committees and the potential to limit their number, effectiveness, and meeting times, we are also concerned that advisory committees have not been meeting for the past 8 months, presumably due to COVID-19. At the beginning of the crisis, when most city functions were shut down and council and staff were primarily focused on the safety and well-being of Londoners, it made sense to put a pause on advisory committee meetings. But as time has gone on and most businesses, services, schools have begun to operate again, and the business of the city has restarted, so too should advisory committees. The city is making key decisions around COVID recovery efforts. It is moving forward on a budget process and continuing to implement its strategic plan. Tomorrow, the budget will be tabled and an update will be given on the strategic plan process. Federal and provincial money is coming to the city for infrastructure and recovery projects. Indigenous and anti-racism initiatives are moving forward, including the Diversity and Inclusion Awards. And yet, advisory committees tasked with providing input on all of these matters are not meeting. It is as if the city has eliminated advisory committees by putting them into a holding pattern. The current members' terms are up in 6 months' time, and if they are not scheduled to meet soon, their terms will have essentially been cut in half to 1 year. That shows a fundamental lack of respect to the commitment these members have made to their city. As an organization deeply invested in citizen engagement, we are concerned that the lack of citizen voices in decision-making, particularly in a time of crisis. There are other mechanisms that have been put in place to get input: the Mayor's Task Force and the London Community Recovery Network, both of which are important and valuable. But these groups are made up of business and organizational leaders, not everyday citizens. Where are the voices of the people of the community as the city moves forward in recovery efforts and its regular business? Why isn't the city fulfilling its responsibility towards the many volunteers who applied, were selected, and have invested their expertise into improving our city? We recognize there are added pressures and responsibilities to staff and council right now. The hard work and time put in by all is appreciated and acknowledged, but citizen engagement should never fall to the wayside for extended periods of time like it currently has. The expertise of advisory committee members is valuable and helpful to the city in this moment. They are not a burden, an extra, or a nice to have. They are the members appointed by council to advise council on everything from the environment to transportation to accessibility and diversity, all of which are issues that the city continues to make decisions on right now, but without dedicated citizen involvement. We also have concerns. We also echo the concerns made by Jacqueline Madden, the former chair of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, in her previous delegation to this committee, and would like to add comments on the staff report on advisory committees that went to the governance working group last week. We have concerns around the random selection of advisory committee members and how this reduces the opportunity to ensure that there are people with the right expertise and lived experience of the committees, and therefore reducing their effectiveness. As well, the recommendation that advisory committees only meet as required. As we understand, this has gone back to staff with ask for more specificity. Council's use of advisory committees is already somewhat vague and unspecific, and we are concerned that this will further reduce their effectiveness and the transparency and accountability of council to its citizens. Overall, our ask right now is that the city reinstate the meetings of advisory committees as soon as possible. Our city will benefit, COVID recovery efforts will benefit, and council will benefit. Better input leads to better decisions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now I'll look to committee to see if there are any comments or questions for our delegates. Okay, seeing none, I'll look for a motion to close the public participation part. And I just wanted to thank, go ahead, Mayor Holder.
Well, I was going to move, but I was also going to add my thanks, but I'll leave that to you, Chair. I think that was very helpful.
Okay, thank you. I'll move by Mayor Holder and seconded by anyone to close the public participation part. Yep, Councillor Hopkins. I just wanted to thank the delegates for coming here today and speaking to our committee, and we appreciate you taking the time to do that. Now we'll go to, we have no deferred, oh, sorry. Okay, so I'll go to Councillor Hopkins.
Madam Chair, is the public participation or the delegation still open? Or
It was, it's closed, and it was my,
It closed? Okay, I wasn't sure where we were. And thank you for allowing me to thank also the two delegates that came out. I think it is an important conversation that is going on in the community as to where the present advisory groups, what the plans are for the present advisory groups. So through you, Madam Chair, to staff, I would like to find out what the plans moving forward for the present advisory groups are.
Through you, Madam Chair, we are looking at holding meetings of the advisory committees in the new year. And if council passes the motion, the recommendation from the governance working group, we will be reaching out to the advisory committees regarding the review, and at the same time, we will speak to them to determine what they're most comfortable as to the method for which they're going to meet. Noting that we'll be recommending remote meetings just to ensure that staff are already exposed to the public. So just to reduce the amount of exposure for both staff and for the members of the advisory committee during the pandemic. But we will be reaching out to them to hold meetings in the new year.
yes, Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you for that. And if I can just have a quick follow-up question as to, will that be taking place now, the follow-up with advisory groups, in which the best way to proceed in the new year? Will that be done, I guess, after council meets with the governance working group? I'm just trying to understand, have a better understanding why we can't go forward now with the advisory groups and reaching out to them to find out best ways to move forward in the new year, and why the two are associated. I'm just wanting a little bit more clarification, because there is a bit of confusion when we talk about the present advisory groups and where they are. And I think that's what the delegates spoke to us at this meeting. And then there is how we're going to move forward with the future advisory groups. And to me, there are two different conversations, but I would like clarity. I think it's important that the community understands where we are when it comes to two different conversations that are going on.
Mrs. Saunders.
Through you, Madam Chair, I agree with you. They're two totally different conversations. I was just trying to be efficient of use of staff time, of having the meeting at the same time, but we can certainly do in two separate ways if that's the preference.
If I may suggest that, given the interest as to where we are with advisory groups, that staff should be reaching out and asking our advisory groups, informing them as to what the procedures are at City Hall, but also what is the best way to move forward in the new year. And I would encourage, I don't know if we need a motion for this, but I just would encourage staff to reach out as soon as possible to these groups to find out best practices and best ways to move forward in the new year.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. I'll go to Councillor Morgan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm going to make a couple of comments and I have a question for our staff. So first, I want to say I'm going to start my comments from the place of someone who deeply believes in empowering voices in our community. It's one of the reasons why one of the first things I pushed for when I got on council was neighborhood decision making. to empower those residents who can bring great ideas to the city to have the opportunities to do so. Our advisory committees are one of many ways that we engage with citizens. And I will say for my decision making, it is one part of the decision-making mechanism. There are 161 some odd individuals on advisory committees whose advice I take very seriously, but I also represent a ward of 37,000 people, representing many people who are not able to commit the time to serve on advisory committees. And it's equally important for us to reach to broad-based public consultation in our decision-making. I'll certainly say I know that there's some dissatisfaction with the way that advisory committees are functioning. And I think that that is both from the perspective of the committees who receive their information, as well as those who serve on advisory committees in whether or not they're being listened to, what their mandates are, where they can express it. But I do want to clarify a couple of things that I heard out there, and that is, first off, the idea that advisory committees are not being engaged. I'm not sure if our clerks can comment on this when I'm done, but I'm looking at an email on my screen right now that I was copied on to the Transportation Advisory Committee back in October, letting them know that the budget was going to be tabled and reaching out to them for engagement on budget items, setting up potential dates and potentially hosting a Zoom meeting for them on the budget that will be tabled tomorrow. So to me, this looks like we are engaging with our advisory committees, at least this one. And I would assume that the others are in similar situations on important matters like the budget. So I want to make sure that that's clear to me, because I want to, I certainly don't want the perception to be out there that we're not engaging on important documents like the budget, if indeed we are. So if the clerks, when I've done my comments, can comment on that, I'd like to have that clarified, because otherwise this email that I was copied on is very confusing to me. The other thing I want to comment on, and I chair the governance working group, is the review process of advisory committees. And I know a number of the comments probably were made reading the report, but not sure what the working group has recommended coming out of that meeting. So the working group has recommended no changes. And one of the things that they suggested was, first off, not moving forward with some of the expert panel pieces, but keeping a number of advisory committees as advisory. The second piece was not meeting as is, but actually scheduling dates for advisory committees to meet, and then they would either ramp up or ramp down depending on the workload that they would have. So that was also a recommendation the governance working group had on the report. The other piece is consultation with advisory committees. So we are not going to look at another iteration of the reports related to the review of advisory committees until the advisory committees have looked at that report and included their feedback with it. So the engagement with advisory committees on the advisory committee review will be direct and appropriate, assuming that SPPC and council pass the government's working group committee's recommendations. And ideally, this will be a forum for any of these concerns to come out from the advisory committees on the types of things that are being suggested or the approaches that are being considered. And I certainly think that is a very appropriate and very important component of the review process, is to engage with those who are already part of the current system to make sure that the improvements we make work for them as well. So maybe I'll leave it at that. And if the clerks could comment on this idea that we're not having engagement with advisory committees, and because my understanding is we are engaging with them on things like the budget.
I'll look to Mrs. Saunders for comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Councillor Morgan, that's correct. We have reached out to all of the advisory committees with respect to the budget, asking if they wanted to meet or just provide their comments directly, giving them that choice. We're also circulating any notices of applications or environmental assessments that are coming our way. We're circulating that information to advisory committee members so that they're aware of it, and inviting them to either talk as their subcommittees or submit comments as individuals.
Thank you. And so I will say I'm glad that's happening. I think it's very appropriate for us to be engaging with the advisory committees on a document as important as the budget, as well as a number of other things. And that sounds like an appropriate process. So I look forward to their feedback on the budget, as well as their feedback on the engagement review process. And I'll end by saying, I really appreciate the two speakers today taking the time to come forward and share their concerns as well. On the review in progress, but I hope that some of your concerns have been put to ease, knowing what Governance Working Group has recommended and knowing the process of engagement that is happening through the clerk's office on documents like the budget. I certainly know that's not the full ask of everything returning to status quo, but I'm hoping that that's helpful to know that it's not nothing happening, everything isn't on hold, that there is actually engagement happening.
I'll go to Councillor Van Hulst.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I certainly feel sad if it seems like that it's a fundamental lack of respect that the committees haven't been engaged, and certainly I think our respect for the committees and their experience was also part of the reason, and perhaps the main reason, that we engaged in a review as well, because people were describing their frustrations with the process. And so I feel bad it's come across this way. It's unfortunate, and I think maybe there was a little confusion about the why things were ended, and with respect to COVID, and certain the meetings, why the meetings were ended and why they weren't started up again. But I do see us taking some action, and I hope that the committee members will be satisfied with those actions moving forward. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from committee? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to speak again. I would just like to say through you, Madam Chair, to staff, and more or less encourage staff to reach out to the present advisory groups and find out from them what's the best way moving forward. If we're looking at opening up advisory groups in the new year, I think now is the best way to start that conversation and have a plan moving forward. I personally don't think there's a need to wait, but I would just like to encourage staff to reach out and find out from the groups which is the best way for them to meet and move forward, hopefully in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I think it's important to emphasize that it was council direction that said we're not going to have the advisory committees meet at the beginning of the pandemic when we were having the response. We did deal with a report back in June where we dealt with a number of the initial financial impacts. We made some changes, and we did direct it unless there was a real urgency to have those meetings, that the advisory committee meetings would be put on hold. And I think what has happened, looking back in retrospect, is that we probably should have passed a direction to have those resume a while ago as virtual meetings. We've heard from a number of advisory committees who are eager to be meeting. I think the delegates today and the delegates we had earlier from the Accessibility Advisory Committee have pointed out why the input of advisory committees is so useful. And now that we've figured out these virtual meetings, I think we had this figured out a while ago, how to make that work. I think it was appropriate to put stuff on pause at the beginning, but once we had kind of figured out how to do the virtual meetings, I think resuming those would have been helpful. We can't go back in time and change those things, but I would say from my own perspective, the sooner those resume, the better. And I think maybe some committees are more eager than others to get right back at it as soon as possible. So, I don't know that we actually need to have a direction, because I think committees can meet despite the resolution that we passed. But if it is necessary, I think perhaps we should deal with that as a group and say, you know, we'd like the meetings to resume as soon as they can, because I think I think we have to consider things like maybe less frequently. You know, perhaps we're not going to be meeting so often, but these virtual meetings, they tend to be a bit shorter, a little bit more focused. There's some advantages of the virtual meetings. You don't have all the travel time. And perhaps even from a staff burden perspective, it can be a little bit less than all the in-person meetings that were happening before. So, you know, I don't want to overburden the clerk staff with work. They're still dealing with a lot of important impacts from COVID, and it's not like it's back to normal. It's certainly not. But I do think some virtual meetings of the advisory committees would be important and should happen as soon as they can. And I'm in line with Councillor Hopkins, and it could be a bit earlier probably than the new year. We still have some time between now and the end of the year.
I'll go to Mrs. Saunders for comment.
Through you, Madam Chair, the direction from the governance working group will go to SPPC tomorrow and then to council next week. So I apologize. I was just trying to be more efficient with time, with staff time, but if you wish, I can certainly start reaching out. We have been reaching out to the committees. We've had some concerns raised with having only remote meetings with some members of the committee, so we'll certainly be working with them. Advisory committees could have met at any time after June if there was a request for a matter under a legislation that needed to be done in a timely manner. So I just don't want it left with the impression that we haven't had any advisory committee meetings, because we have. But I hear clearly to move forward, and I will take that that direction. It's up to you if you want a motion. I don't think I need it, but if you wish to do it that way, that's totally up to you.
Any other comments or questions from committee? Okay, I just had a few questions. I know that council had moved to get advisory committees not to meet at the time, but I'm curious to know what it takes for them to meet, if it's just a virtual meeting or if there are a lot of work that have to go behind that.
Through you, Madam Chair, we'll reach out to find out which is the best approach. I'm going to assume it might be a combination, and a combination is actually more work for clerk staff and involves more staff if it's because we'll have to set up a committee room with staff in the committee room and then also deal with the remote. But we'll do whatever the committee wishes, whatever they're most comfortable with. I have heard from some committee members, advisory committee members, that they don't have access to a computer. And then I've also heard from others who are not comfortable coming in because of the pandemic. So we'll work with them to figure out what works best for their committee.
Thank you. That is good context to know. And also just wanted to say that I think engagement goes farther than just an email, especially when you need to have a decision that is made by a group, not just, so communicating by email is important, it's great, but we have to have also the input from the group when they meet. So I do look forward to when we get to that place where they can actually begin to meet and this can be resolved. So thank you again to the delegates that came to speak to our committee today. We appreciate you taking the time, and this is an important discussion, and as long as it takes for us to sort it out, it's important that we continue to hear from the voices of our community, because this is what our jobs are. So thank you. That's been moved and seconded. Yes? And we will now call to question.
Mayor Holder?
Yeah, I'm waiting for this to come up. E-scribe, if not, yes.
You may need to refresh your screen. You want to give that a try so that we have it lined up for this afternoon?
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. So we have no deferred matters lists or additional businesses. We will now head into our confidential session for the items that are on the agenda from 6.1 to 6.4, 5. And I will look for a mover and a seconder for us to go in confidential session. Moved by Mayor Holder, seconded by Councillor Helmer, and we will call to question.
Chair, I'm not refreshed yet, so I vote yes.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.